Hello, my good people. They say sequels are never as good as the original, and more often than not, they're right. However, there is the rare occasion where the follow-up somehow surpasses the original, sometimes even by a long shot. So today I'm counting down my personal top 10 sequels that are better than the original. Note that for the film to be on the list, I have to be 100% sure, or at least 90% sure that they're better than their predecessor. There's a lot of sequels that are good, but I'm not sure if they're truly better or not. Second rule is that they can't be from a movie series that was always intended to be a long-running franchise from the start. So no Star Wars films, Harry Potter, or even Lord of the Rings, since those are more like second chapters than sequels. Also, I plan to rank all the Star Wars movies one day. Also, to keep things simple, I'm only including Part 2s, aka second installments on the list. Anyways, let's go! Hellboy 2. Now let me say, while the first Hellboy was definitely a creative and unique film, there were some things holding it back, like the overall kind of odd way it handles certain story elements and the world building that could have been improved, though it's still a good movie overall. However, the sequel, The Golden Army, is much more sharply written. The characters feel more three-dimensional, and the creativity is more plentiful. Some of the creatures are really unique, like the smoke monster who gains a physical form by going inside a mechanical suit, who's also a hilarious new addition to the cast, the creepy-ass tooth fairies, and one of the more creative depictions of Death himself in a film. But of course, those are just the visuals. The actual meat of the film is what matters, and yes, the story is more interesting and heartfelt. I felt a lot more attached to these characters this time around. I legitimately felt like they were close friends. There's a lot more character-building moments, and I even like the romance between Hellboy and Elizabeth. Also, spoilers, I do like how even though he's destined to become evil and bring hell to Earth, she still chooses to keep him alive and stay with him. Though I do hope that with enough time, he'll be able to fight off his demon instincts. Speaking of which, I did sympathize with Hellboy often getting the cold shoulder by humans, even when doing good, and makes you wish that people would give the poor demon a chance. With more fleshed out characters, more interesting concepts, and more memorable scenes, meaningful moments, and overall fun, Hellboy 2 is one hell of a good time. Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Let me say two things. One is that there are definitely better sequels than this one. However, I'm including movies on here not just based off quality alone, but how much they've improved upon their predecessors. And while there are sequels that are better movies overall, even if they're not as good as the first, I feel this one is massively more enjoyable than its predecessor. The big thing is that this movie actually focuses a lot more on Sonic and the other anthropomorphic characters, rather than the mostly boring human characters. The story, well, kind of odd with its war between echidnas and owls as a backstory, for example. There's a lot more good character interactions. The whole adventure feels bigger since there's more at stake this time, as well as bigger Pearl. And to top it all off, there's much more references and direct inspiration from the games, such as the Master Emerald being part of the story, the Death Egg Robot, and Supersonic. Also, due to bigger scope, it actually feels more like a video game since we're going from location to location, kind of like video game worlds. Also, the characters are done much more justice, since Sonic is now trying to be a hero without getting too cocky, Tails being a fanboy of Sonic and starting a close friendship with him that feels genuine, but the best character by far in this movie is probably Knuckles, who, although an antagonist, at first at least, is actually a good foil to Sonic since their backstories are connected and they have gone through similar tragedy. The scene where the two talk to each other about why Knuckles chose to help Sonic and what being a hero really means is actually heartwarming for a movie that is often seen as goofy and silly. Another thing that helps it surpass the first one is it feels a lot more like a Sonic movie, not just because it incorporates more game elements into the movie, but because it's an adventure where Sonic and Tails go from location to location and battle Dr. Eggman's robots, as opposed to a road trip movie. I'll admit I would have preferred a fully animated Sonic movie, but I never thought we'd get a Sonic movie at all. Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Speed up and watch it. How to Train Your Dragon 2. A sequel that feels more adventurous, bigger in scale and scope, and takes more risks overall. For starters, the story felt more adventurous and has some great heartfelt and emotional moments. The whole world of Berk is expanded upon with the whole dragon world, and many new different species of dragons. In the first movie, there was only like 6 or 7 different species of dragons. In the sequel, there's over 30 different types from what I can tell. From small to big and even ocean-dwelling ones. The animation is much more impressive and beautiful, with its flying effects and locations. The characters are given more development, and we get to meet Hiccup's mother, who's actually an interesting character with a unique backstory. Hiccup's dad is also great in this, but with that being said, enjoy him while you can. The movie also has some tense moments, has more humor overall, and feels bigger, better, and more grand, as well as having great characters, both new and old, as well as an insane new antagonist who definitely tops the first villain. Sure, he's not a 100-foot mind-controlling beast, but he's a legitimate threat to both humans and dragons, and at one point he proves how heartless he truly is, though I still think the antagonist from the third movie is the best. How to Train Your Dragon 2 heats up an already good film. Rocky 2, while it's hard not to appreciate the first one for how innovative it is, especially when one looks at the history of how it was made, but sorry, the second one is better in a lot of ways. For starters, the movie perfectly continues where the original left off, and shows Rocky's life with Adrian, and how tying the match affected his life positively. Now, what works about this film is that the whole family drama feels real, the story can feel more emotional, and has overall more heart. Like case in point, the motivation for him to go out and box again, his wife who's in a coma tells him to win. Cue epic training montage. Although the movie can be cheesy at times, the gripping story and good characters make up for it, and it does have a good message. In order to be successful at your goals, you can't just be physically healthy, but emotionally healthy as well. Rocky was able to win this time because he had a lot more support from his friends and family, while Creed, who was in a much worse state due to assholes being mean to him and his family, wasn't. I like how even though Creed is technically the antagonist, there isn't any real villains. I mean, no one's really evil, and it's surprisingly easy to sympathize with our antagonist, who at the end of the day isn't so different than Rocky himself. And even after his fight with him and Rocky wins this time around, he thanks him for putting up a good fight. It's a real feel-good movie with good morals and themes. Rocky 2, it's a real knockout. Kung Fu Panda 2. If you haven't seen any of the Kung Fu Panda movies, let me say, they're better than they sound. It's a goofy sounding title, but they really do pay tribute to the martial arts films and have good morals and themes. And while all the movies are good, I still feel like the second one is the greatest so far. It ups the action, it ups the stakes, and it ups the drama and feels. For starters, there's not only more action set pieces that are more memorable, but the animation is more impressive with its amazing backgrounds and stylish visuals. With flashbacks and 2D animation, the fighting choreography is some of the greatest from DreamWorks, and there's more great character moments, such as Po and Tigris becoming better friends, or Ping's relationship with his adopted son. Also, Po being adopted isn't a spoiler. It's common knowledge. I mean, one's a goose and one's a panda. One thing to appreciate is that the characters who don't get a whole lot of time to shine in the first one are given much more screen time and more to do. All of a sudden, they become much more memorable and you like them even more. Not only is the movie more exciting than the first, but it's also deeper with its themes of moving on from loss and emotional trauma, as well as finding inner peace. That's right, this movie called Kung Fu Panda starring Jack Black gets emotional, though it still has lots of humor of course. To top it all off, it easily has the best villain in the trilogy, who's probably the most evil thus far, has a great design and even a personal connection to our hero. It's a movie worth kung fu fighting over. Short Circuit 2. The original WALL-E, in appearance at least, not really story. The first Short Circuit was a likable and cute E.T. type movie with a lovable robot who learns what human emotions are and goes against his programming on being a war weapon, as well as his friendship with a woman. The sequel takes place in New York City, and focuses on Johnny's time in the Big Apple, after ending up in town even though he's not supposed to leave the warehouse. Long story. And how people in the city view him as nothing more but a machine despite being alive and sentient. Now, what I do like a lot about this movie is that, for starters, despite some outdated elements, i.e. this guy isn't actually played by an Indian, it's pretty ahead of its time with its themes, as the movie touches on prejudice with people seeing Johnny Five as a lesser being for being different, how Fred tries to sell Johnny Five thinking he's just advanced AI, and even the police unfairly arresting him. There's also more suspense and interesting scenes. Without giving anything away, I did legitimately fear for our protagonists' lives on more than one occasion, as the crime lords are a threat both to Johnny Five and the two human protagonists. The main villain, Oscar, is such a manipulative prick. It makes his comeuppance all the more satisfying at the end. And there were many scenes that helped us understand our characters more, like the friendship between Johnny Five and Ben. The scenes with the two trying to help each other are legitimately heartwarming. Also kind of a father and son relationship since Ben helped create him in the first place. There's just a lot more charm in this movie. It feels more oddly original than the original, and has overall more personality. Overall, Johnny Five feels more alive. Toy Story 2. My personal favorite of the series, also the most nostalgia of the franchise to me, Toy Story 2 improved upon the first one in many ways, both visually and in storytelling. For starters, the adventure is much bigger since our heroes travel quite far away from their home this time around, and come across many more locations that make the whole experience feel more grand. We get more of a story with the supporting characters, and many more exciting set pieces and awesome moments, and we're introduced to some great additions to the cast. Another thing I like is that story-wise is how, in the first one, Buzz was the one who had to learn that he was not a real space ranger, but a toy, and comes to terms with how that's okay. But in the sequel, it's Buzz who tells Woody that he shouldn't go to the museum and reminds him a toy's purpose in life is to make a child happy. Not only is that a good contrast to the first movie, but it really shows how much he's changed since then. Also, the callback to his reaction to disabling his helmet was great. Also, Zurg and Stinky Pete are probably my favorite of the Toy Story villains, as I do get Pete's motivation the most. Anyways, with all that and more, this sequel really does go to infinity and beyond. Terminator 2. Once again, this could be considered a big long-running franchise like Star Wars or Harry Potter, but three things. For starters, Terminator 2 is such a noteworthy movie sequel to surpass the original that it would be a crime not to mention it. Second of all is that the sequels are kind of confusing in their timelines, since a lot of them tend to ignore everything after the first two and are set in separate universes, so the first two are the only ones that are canon, I guess. And third of all, this was planned to be a single follow-up. Anyways, Terminator 2 is a very different yet much better film than the first, with better action, better writings, and better overall themes. One thing I really liked is how they have the main villain of the first one be reprogrammed to be an ally, though he still doesn't fully understand right from wrong. Also how much more intense and even heartfelt it is, with scenes about what it means to be human and gaining humanity, as well as a threatening new villain who's much more dangerous and advanced. Speaking of him, the liquid metal still looks believable and impressive to this day. Okay, maybe didn't age that well, but still. Yeah, not only is the Teeth 1000 great, but the world building and overall backstory to the bad future. Also, the much more unique idea of having a main antagonist from the first be not only one of the main heroes, but a father figure, as well as learning more about Sarah Connor's life and how the events from the first one affected her life. With more action, better character moments, and overall more thrills, it's definitely a recommendation for you to watch and make your own judgment. Shrek 2. Now how do you make a sequel that perfectly subverts all the fairy tale tropes? Have a movie that takes place after the happily ever after. Like what would happen after the happily ever after? How would the family react to all this? Which is a great way to continue the story, especially since the first one did an amazing job at subverting the typical tropes. Just about everything is expanded upon, the whole world is given much more life and creativity, with how the whole world feels like a good mixture of fairy tale fantasy and modern day life. Stuff like how there's a bad guy bar called the Poison Apple, how there's a whole magic potion service, and Far Far Away being a parody of Hollywood, just to name a few. The story is overall more exciting, heartfelt, and even intelligent, actually. The movie keeps a lot of the greatest elements from the first one, like its saturation of fairy tales, though still paying homage to them, the awesome soundtrack that not only adds to the overall identity of the Shrek series, but helps add more layers to the scenes and make them more memorable, and of course the humor. There's tons of jokes in almost every scene, and most of them land. The writing is smart enough to make both children and adults laugh, as there's both kid jokes and adult jokes, and some good shoutouts to other films. But there's much more to this film than just jokes. The old characters are given much more development, like Shrek and Fiona's relationship feels legit, and I do buy them as an odd couple, and it is heartwarming to see how far they'll go for each other. Donkey proves yet again that he's more than just a comic relief character, he's also a good friend. And we're introduced to some new characters who are just as memorable, including fan favorite Puss in Boots. Yeah, there's generally some legit good dramatic moments that surpass the original, and the action moments are much better. Case in point, the I Need a Hero scene. It has tension, an awesome moment for every character involved, and even drama, all set to an awesome cover. The creativity, originality, risks, humor, and genuine drama. Is it a wonder why they say this film has layers like an onion? I know it's a joke from the first one, but still. Before we get to my number one, let me list some honorable mentions. Madagascar 2, an even more funny and well thought out film. It has a storyline for each character, and its climax is both suspenseful and hilarious. It was going to go on the list, but then I realized there's another DreamWorks sequel I like more. Gremlins 2, The New Batch. It's funnier, has better cinematography, a more unique main setting, and has Gizmo eventually stand up to the Gremlins after pushing him around, but there's another upcoming list where I can talk more about it. Anyways, on to number one. Before I state what my number one choice is, I'd like to say something. While it was surprisingly easy for me to find 10 sequels that were better than the original, I legitimately had a hard time deciding what order they should go in. And while I think I'm satisfied with what order I put them in, I'd like to say that the number one choice, I'm not sure if it's the best movie on this list. However, in terms of how it compares to the original, it definitely blows it out of the water, as it turned a movie that was more okay into something awesome. Top Gun Maverick. Now, what works about this follow-up is that not only does it improve upon the first one, but its story is better written and its characters feel more fleshed out. The characters, both new and old, feel more like real characters, and even the more minor characters have some time to shine. Yeah, I guess I should mention that the movie is now a lot more character-driven. The story is about our protagonist becoming a leader to some new recruits, while dealing with some past traumatic things, and aging, so it feels a lot more human and not just mindless. Another thing is that the story this time around is given a lot more time to build up the conflict, the drama, the victory, and even its thrilling moments. That's another thing I really like about the movie. The action scenes are now much more intense and really feel like you're a part of them. Case in point, when the planes went upside down, it actually felt like I was in there, and the cinematography this time around felt even more impressive. Also, the climax of the film is one of the best I've seen in a while, although I'll admit some of the dialogue is kinda corny at times, and it's not nearly as amazing as some other people say it is. But its themes are actually good and it can be deep at times. Case in point, it made me think about how people I know will be different in years from now, and how I can still be as lively as I am now, and how true friendships can last forever. Although I've already said it does have deeper elements, and is a lot more character-driven, it's still a fun movie with fast-paced action and lighthearted moments. Top Gun Maverick. If you haven't seen it, it should be at the top of your list. Also, there's one more thing I gotta say before I go. Copyright disclaimer. Under Section 107 of Copyright Act 1976, allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news report, technicking, scholarship, and research. What I'm trying to say is, this video 100% falls under fair use. If you're a fan of any of the movies here, please consider watching them through legal means.